The series opens with a massive crowd gathered in front of a building, all hoping to attend a special event. Suddenly, a man wearing a hoodie breaks through the line, causing an uproar among the waiting people. However, when he reveals himself as No-Go Jin, the famous CEO of South Korea's top online classroom company and a renowned math instructor, everyone is stunned. As Go Jin stands at the front of the queue, a sniper takes aim at him from the rooftop of a nearby building. Meanwhile, Lee Shina, Go Jin's secretary, rushes to buy necessities for her boss, known for his grumpiness and fierce personality. When Go Jin arrives at the office, Shina nervously greets him and offers him breakfast. But when he discovers an onion in his sandwich, he throws it away and scolds Shina, causing her to take headache medicine to cope with his constant irritation. After some time, Kang Min, an English instructor who was known to be bad at his job, met with Go Jin because he was about to be fired. Later that day, Go Jin held a meeting with all the instructors at Go Top Education, where he announced Kang Min's dismissal and urged everyone to improve their teaching. During the meeting, Oh Si-jan, the deputy CEO, arrived and was warmly welcomed by the employees due to his friendly and amiable nature. Unlike Go Jin, who was known for being difficult to work with, Si-jan seemed to get along well with everyone. Go Jin and Se-jai continued their conversation in Go Jin's office, where they appeared to bond over common interests. Go Jin had planned to celebrate his birthday with Si-ji over dinner, but Se-jai declined, saying he had an event to attend. This upset Go Jin, as he had been looking forward to the celebration. However, to his surprise, Si-jai and Shin later threw him a surprise birthday party that made him very happy. During the celebration, Go Jin opened one of the gifts on his desk and found a blood-stained object inside. He remained calm so as not to raise any suspicion from Se-jai, who was still in the room. Later, Se-jai informed Go Jin that he was going to America to expand the company's market and asked for some time off upon his return. As soon as Se-jai left, Go Jin took the blood-stained object to his secret room, where he stored various items sent to him by people who disliked him. He had received numerous death threats in the past, and this was just another reminder of the danger he faced. Shina was emotional and proud that night because she had been working as Go Jin's secretary for a year, a feat that nobody else has accomplished. Just as she was leaving, Si-jai approached her, congratulating her on her one-year anniversary and giving her flowers and a bonus. Si-jai encouraged Shina not to give up on her dream of becoming an instructor at GoTop, and also advised her to take a vacation leave. When Shina got home, she shared her experience with her friend Oki, who joked that Shina needed to see a doctor since she always took headache medicine while working at GoTop. On the following day, Go Jin was scheduled to give a lecture at a university. As he walked into the lecture hall, he noticed a man named Park Yang-tae sitting in the front row. Park Yang-tae was the CEO of Ilpomedu, the second most popular online classroom company in South Korea, just behind Go Jin's own GoTop. Interestingly, before Go Jin's rise to success, he used to work as a janitor in Park Yang-tae's company. But Go Jin's brilliance eventually led him to found GoTop, which quickly became Park Yang-tae's main rival. Meanwhile, in the operator room, GoTop's research assistant, Eun-jung, was feeling flustered. She had forgotten to bring the presentation file for Go Jin's special lecture, and she was unsure of what to do. In a panic, she contemplated blaming her mistake on her colleague, Shina. Shortly after the lecture began, Park Yang-tae tried to play a prank on Go Jin by slipping laxatives into his drink. However, Yang-tae ended up drinking the spiked beverage himself and became very angry. His frustration grew even more when Go Jin suddenly announced that he would donate 1 billion won to the university, leaving everyone in shock. Meanwhile, back at the GoTop office, Shina was searching for Go Jin's presentation files on a flash drive, as requested by Eun-jung. During the lecture, Go Jin started with a cue and a session. One participant asked why he was still teaching math, given that he taught the same material every year. Go Jin replied that he did it for the money, explaining that his family had been so poor in the past that they had gone hungry. He was determined to do anything to avoid dying of poverty. Go Jin was ready to present his lecture, but his material didn't appear on the screen. Eun-jung told him that Shina had forgotten to give him the flash drive containing the presentation, which made Go Jin very upset. Just as Go Jin was about to continue with the lecture, Shina sneaked in. Go Jin pointed at her and said that people who can't help prepare materials for others like her should give up their dreams of becoming an instructor because they won't be able to prepare materials for themselves. Shina didn't know what was going on and felt sad, staying silent. Later that night, Shinna worked overtime to bind Go-jin's materials. But when she remembered his harsh words, she felt even sadder. Luckily, Si-ja had said something to her earlier that helped lift her mood. The next day, Shinna woke up feeling terrible because her head always hurts. She knew she needed to get it checked at the hospital before going to work for an important meeting. But when she arrived at the office, the instructors and assistant instructors hadn't shown up yet, even though she had been waiting for a while. So she asked the janitor, Gong Pil-sun, for some information. That's when she found out that Go-jin had suddenly changed the meeting location to Gangnam. Shinna was disappointed because she had already prepared for the meeting that morning. Just as she was feeling down, the hospital called her to come back urgently for the examination results. When Shinna got there, she was in for a shock. The doctor told her that she had a late-stage brain tumor. She couldn't believe it. During her journey back from the hospital, Shinna's mind was racing with disbelief. The doctor had warned her that she might not have long to live. She couldn't believe that this was happening to her. Suddenly, she remembered the past 3 years ago. Shinna had just finished a 2-year internship program at Gotop, hoping to become an instructor. But unfortunately, she didn't pass the selection process. So she transferred to work as the president director's secretary's office before eventually becoming Go-jin's secretary. As Shinna tried to process her diagnosis, she couldn't help but feel unlucky. She saw a Gotop billboard, and it reminded her of the stress she had endured as Go-jin's secretary over the past year. The doctor told her that the severe stress had caused her migraine and likely her brain tumor. Shinna was furious and blamed Go-jin for her illness. She wanted revenge. Meanwhile, Go-jin was on vacation in Gangnam, enjoying his free time and daydreaming about Bak Soo-young, his ex-lover. But back at Go-jin's villa, Shinna appeared, dressed in black and heavy makeup. Go-jin had just finished showering and was surprised to see her. Shinna was full of anger and suddenly pointed a hammer at Go-jin. She threw her resignation letter and even pelted him with onions. After her confrontation with Go-jin, Shinna left, but he tried to follow her, and a fight ensued in her car. Luckily, she managed to escape. Later, Go-jin called Shinna and they argued again. Suddenly, there was a loud crash on the phone and Go-jin was hit by a car. Shinna rushed back to his house and found him lying unconscious on the road. She called an ambulance and took him to the hospital. Shinna was anxious when she learned Go-jin needed surgery, but fortunately, the operation was successful, and he would be moved to a hospital room the next day. Meanwhile, Kang Min was seen in a damaged car covered in blood, and it seemed he was the one who hit Go-jin. Shinna tried to call Si-ja, but he was on his way to America and had forgotten his phone. As the sun rose, Go-jin was transferred to a hospital room while Shinna waited anxiously by his side. She couldn't help but feel guilty for what had happened. Suddenly, Go-jin's body started shaking violently, causing Shinna to call for help. When the doctor arrived, she asked why Go-jin hadn't woken up yet. The doctor explained that his body was very sensitive to anesthesia, and it might take a long time for him to come to. Meanwhile, at the Gotop office, everyone was oblivious to the accident and assumed that Go-jin and Shinna were taking a vacation. Little did they know what had happened. Over at the Jdrama Foundation in Gangnam, a brand inauguration ceremony was taking place. Soo-young, the new president of the foundation, had just returned to South Korea and was introducing herself to the crowd. Later on, Soo-young headed back to her hotel room and ended up bumping into Shinna by accident. Unfortunately, Soo-young's drink was spilled all over her. As an apology, Soo-young lent Shinna an outfit that was given to her by her first love. Although Shinna initially refused to wear it, she eventually gave in and accepted the outfit. However, Shinna's peace didn't last for long. She received a call from the hospital where she had undergone an examination, asking her to come back immediately for treatment. Shinna was shocked to realize that she had been taking care of Go-jin, the man who had given her a brain tumor. She decided to leave Go-jin and went to Gangnam Station, but on her way, she collided with Kang Min, who was wearing a hat, making him unrecognizable. Things got even worse when 2 policemen suddenly stopped Shinna and asked her to come with them for questioning about Go-jin's hit-and-run incident. The police suspected Shinna and asked her many questions that made her feel trapped because all the evidence pointed towards her. Although she maintained her innocence, she was still cornered. Shinna called Aki, who worked as a lawyer, to help her. When Aki finally arrived at the Gangnam police station, she found it difficult to defend Shin, because all the evidence was pointing towards her as the hit-and-run perpetrator. Even Aki was beginning to have doubts about Shinna's innocence. Shinna felt helpless and didn't know how to prove her innocence until she received a call from the hospital, informing her that Go-jin had woken up. Shin, Aki, and the police rushed to the hospital. Upon arrival, the doctor explained that Go-jin had amnesia and could not recall the hit-and-run incident or how Shin had sought revenge against him. The doctor also told them that Go-jin's condition needed to be discussed with his family. However, Shin had other plans. She claimed to be Go-jin's fiancée and came up with a plan for revenge. A while later, Go-jin was still lying in the hospital bed, struggling to shake off the nightmare that had jolted him awake. In his dream, he relived the terrible accident when a car had hit him. As he tried to calm down, Shin and the doctor walked into the room. They were greeted by the sight of Go-jin looking lost and confused, a far cry from his usual self. Outside, Oki was trying to keep the police at bay, claiming to be a lawyer. But it turned out that she was only a part-time theater actress who worked at a law firm. Suddenly, the police received a call that changed everything. The bloodstains on Shinna's car were not from the accident, but from something else entirely. This new revelation left everyone stunned. As the doctor explained Go-jin's condition, he looked bewildered and innocent, unable to remember anything from his past, including Shinna, who claimed to be his fiancée. Grateful for her support, Go-jin thanked Shinna for being there for him. However, this only upset Shinna, who was furious that Go-jin had forgotten all the wrongs he had done to her. Outside the room, Shinna shared her plan for revenge with Aki. She wanted to pretend to be Go-jin's fiancé and make him suffer before she died. As Soo-young arrived at the hotel, she looked upset. She couldn't forget the time she went to the hospital to visit someone and overheard people talking about Go-jin being in the hospital. So she rushed to see him, hoping to be of some help. But when she got there, Go-jin didn't recognize her at all. In the hospital, Go-jin was undergoing some tests to check his brain health. Despite having amnesia, he still managed to solve complex math problems, which showed that his brain was still functioning well. Meanwhile, Shinna, with Aki's help, started pretending to be Go-jin's fiancé to everyone. Although her intentions were far from noble, she took care of him as if she genuinely cared for him. Little did anyone know that her kindness was only a ploy to torture him in secret. Sejah had just returned from America and received some information about Go-jin from the police. The news quickly spread around the office, and everyone started talking about it. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Go-jin was still unsure whether Shinna was really his fiancée. She decided to prove it to him by sharing details of their past meetings and showing him edited photos of them together. She even gave him a ring as a symbol of their engagement. Shinna left the room, and Sejah arrived to find out that Go-jin had amnesia. When Shinna returned, she was surprised to see Sejah. He asked her about her claim to be Go-jin's fiancé, and she nervously explained the situation. Luckily, Sejah seemed to believe her, and he left Go-jin in her care. Sejah then headed back to the office where he faced the media and tried to calm down the employees who were talking about Go-jin's accident. Meanwhile, Eun-jung, who was spying for Yang-tae, reported on Go-top's current state and Go-jin's condition. Kang-min was shown hurriedly packing up his things and making a phone call. Shinna was returning clothes to Soo-young through the hotel receptionist when suddenly, she felt dizzy because of her illness. She almost fell down, but thankfully she managed to calm down by the beach. Just when she thought everything was okay, her father Lee Yong-gu called. He was worried about her because he had nightmares lately and heard news about her boss having an accident. Shinna tried to assure her father that she was fine, but deep down, she was worried about her boss too. Meanwhile, Soo-young went to visit Go-jin at the hospital to check on him. But to her surprise, Go-jin didn't recognize her because of his amnesia. Soo-young was shocked and immediately sent her men to gather more information about Go-jin. Soon after, Go-jin sat with his lawyer, Choi Da-chol, discussing his case. When Shinna walked in, Go-jin introduced her as his fiancée, which made Da-chol suspicious. He tried to question Shinna and record her statement about their relationship. Shinna hesitated until Sejah arrived and convinced Da-chol that she was indeed Go-jin's fiancée. As Da-chol left, Shinna thanked Sejah, and he reassured her that the most important thing was for her to be by Go-jin's side and look after him, regardless of their official relationship status. One day, a stranger entered Go-jin's hospital room and reached into his jacket, apparently planning to harm him. Suddenly, Go-jin woke up from his sleep, and the scene shifted to the past when he was hit by a car in a hit-and-run incident. After the car drove away, someone approached him. Back in the present, Go-jin woke up and fought off the man who entered his hospital room, as if he didn't have amnesia. Shortly after, Shina arrived and was surprised to see Go-jin fighting, so she helped by injuring the intruder's head. Jae arrived and questioned the man, who turned out to be a sneaky reporter named Lee Dae-seok trying to secretly photograph Go-jin. After the incident, Jae decided to take Go-jin out of the hospital to keep him safe in his apartment in Seoul. Shina was tasked with preparing everything for their move. She returned home to find her brother Suho with her friend Oki, who were secretly dating without her knowledge. Although Shina was suspicious of them, her brother and friend successfully tricked her. The next day, Shina and Oki went to Go-jin's apartment to make it look like Shina was his fiancé by placing photos and personal items. Meanwhile, Soo-young entered her still under construction office and was informed by her staff that Go-jin had amnesia. Go-jin finally returned home with CJ and received a surprise from Shina. Before leaving, CJ asked Shina to help Go-jin at work the next day so that nobody would notice his amnesia. At dinner, Shina continued her revenge by scaring Go-jin with mackerel, his most hated food. The next day, Go-jin arrived at work with a surprisingly friendly and warm attitude, which surprised his co-workers at Go-top. Upon entering his room, Shina handed him a brand new cell phone, while Kim Cha-ba, one of the company's instructors, paid him a visit and expressed his worries. Jae, afraid that Cha-ba would discover Go-jin's amnesia, asked him to leave the room. Go-jin then asked CJ to recover the data on his phone so he could find his engagement photo with Shina, much to Cha-ba's surprise. After Cha-ba left the room, CJ revealed to him that Shina was indeed Go-jin's fiancé and urged him to keep it a secret. Later, Go-jin was interviewed on the rooftop of the Go-top office to calm the public's worries about his condition. Before the interview, Shina bought him fresh juice, but Eun-jung confronted her and insulted her for being a nobody who was only taking care of Go-jin. In response, Shina threw the juice on Eun-jung and threatened her. During the interview, Go-jin suddenly fainted when asked about the night of the accident, so he was taken back to his room. When he woke up, he apologized to CJ for messing up the interview. CJ apologized for pushing him to do it, even though Go-jin wasn't feeling well. Eun-jung also showed up to express her concern and inform him about an event he had to attend. CJ offered to replace Go-jin at the event because he was still worried about his health, but Go-jin insisted on attending. Meanwhile, Pil-sun and Go-jin's former secretaries are discussing the incident where he fainted during an interview. Sora breaks down in tears and admits to destroying the CCTVs around Go-jin's villa and smearing it with animal feces. She also claims to have seen Shinin at the villa, which leads them to suspect that she has a special relationship with Go-jin. A few days later, everyone at Go-top gets ready for an event that Go-jin is attending, including Shina. She plays a prank on him by giving him hot coffee and lying that he used to love it. Then, Yang Tae arrives and pretends to be worried, offering a bouquet of flowers. After he leaves, Go-jin asks Shina to bring him some fresh juice. The scene takes place at a gambling den where Kang-min is looking pretty upset about losing a game. As he walks away, he runs into Go-jin, which only adds to his frustration. He tries to call someone for help, but they don't answer, making him even more agitated. Suddenly, he gets a mysterious message from an unknown number warning him to get out of there, because Go-jin has amnesia. Meanwhile, a very mysterious person enters Go-jin's room carrying a basket of red roses. At the same time, Shina meets Soo-young at the event, and they start talking. Soo-young is attending the event, and she's curious about Shina's role in it. Little does she know that Shina works for the company that's putting on the event. Back in Go-jin's room, he notices the basket of roses on the table. Something seems off about it, so he takes a closer look. His suspicion pays off when he finds a knife hidden in the flowers. Soon after, Kang-min bursts into the room, startling Go-jin. Go-jin has no idea who Kang-min is, but Kang-min thinks Go-jin has amnesia, so he denies knowing him and apologizes for coming in the wrong room. But just as Kang-min is leaving, Go-jin stops him and takes a plane ticket from his jacket. Go-jin notices Kang-min trembling like he's made a big mistake. Suddenly, Go-jin's innocent expression turns to a creepy one, revealing that he was only pretending to have amnesia. He even remembers everything. As he approaches Kang-min, he tells him that getting amnesia is nothing like catching a cold like in the movies. Kang-min freezes up and Go-jin reveals that he's the one who sent the mysterious message telling him to run away. Kang-min kneels down to apologize, but Go-jin doesn't seem keen on forgiving him. He demands to know who told Kang-min to come to the room. As the students and parents filed into the event venue, Michelle Lee stepped up as the first instructor to deliver her material in English. The audience was captivated, but their attention was soon drawn to Go Jin, who stood tall despite his recent leg injury, and began the entrance exam information session. Sejai was taken aback by Go Jin's determination as he recalled the time when Go Jin had delivered a lesson while his leg was dislocated. When Sejai questioned Go Jin about it, he explained that the way he delivered the material could affect students' focus and even determine whether the class was successful or not. As the information session progressed, Go Jin's charisma and skill quickly won over even the most skeptical of students, including Shin and Hae-sun. They were forced to admit that Go Jin was the best instructor in all of South Korea. Later on, as Shinna visited Go Jin's room, she was surprised to find a knife hidden in a rose basket. Meanwhile, Sejai caught up with Go Jin and commended him on his impressive performance. Sejai then had to rush off to an external meeting and asked Eunjung to escort Go Jin back to his room. To celebrate the success of their event, Go-top organized a dinner at a fancy restaurant. The employees were surprised when Go Jin showed up. During the dinner, there were some awkward moments, including Shinna accidentally claiming to be Go Jin's fiancé and later vomiting on his shirt. Despite all the commotion, the dinner was a success. Afterwards, Go Jin had to take a drunken Shinna back to his apartment. He was frustrated with her behavior and asked his messenger, Ju Junpao, to take care of her while she slept. Meanwhile, Eunjung revealed to Yang Ta that Go Jin was engaged to Shinna and gave him a sneak peek of a question that Go-top would publish in the next month. The next morning, Shinna wakes up disoriented on a bustling street. She's bewildered because she doesn't remember how she ended up there. The previous night, Junpao moved her from Go Jin's apartment. Speaking of Go Jin, he's in his apartment when Soo-young drops by with rice cakes. Unfortunately, he fumbles and drops the plate, shattering it to pieces. Go Jin tries to clean up the shards but injures himself. Soo-young rushes to help and binds his finger with her handkerchief. It reminds Go Jin of an incident from the past when Soo-young tended to him after he hurt himself. He falls for her all over again, but he can't recall her name, leaving Soo-young crestfallen. She suggests that they start afresh by becoming friends. Meanwhile, Shinna suspects her recent memory loss is due to her illness. She decides to hasten her revenge plan against Go Jin. Later in the day, Shinna wakes up Go Jin with military gear and coerces him to take her shopping at a fancy mall. Go Jin declines, prompting Shinna to accuse him of being more money-minded than concerned about his fiancée. Little do they know, someone is watching and taking photographs of their every move at the mall. The next day, Shinna is taken aback when she walks into the office, and all the Go-top employees salute her. They seem to know about her and Go Jin's relationship, which catches her off guard. Sejai, who's in the know, urges Shinna to take a more active role as Go Jin's fiancé to cover up his amnesia. Suddenly, the news breaks that Kang Min has surrendered to the police for the hit-and-run incident involving Go Jin. When Kang Min is in police custody, he remembers meeting Go Jin a few days back. During their conversation, Go Jin asked who ordered Kang Min to do it, but Kang Min denies having any accomplices and claims to have acted alone. Shinna rushes to Go Jin's apartment and finds him already aware of Kang Min's confession. Soon after, Sejai arrives, worried about Go Jin's well-being. In a flashback, the night of the hit-and-run is revisited. As Kang Min's car drives away, someone approaches Go Jin, who is barely conscious. Go Jin notices the person's watch before losing consciousness. In the prison where Kang Min was locked up, Yang Ta went to visit him. But before he could meet him, he saw Sejai leaving Kang Min's cell. Later, Sejai went to Go Jin's room and asked him to have dinner together. But Sejai didn't tell Go Jin that he had just visited Kang Min. Meanwhile, Shinna pretended to be Go Jin and made an announcement to all the employees at Go-top. She told them to go home on time and to take their vacation days if they hadn't already. She also said there would be a company dinner every 2 weeks. At a party for Baek Edu, Soo-young officially opened her school. Yang Tae was there too, and he congratulated her. He wanted to get close to her because she was the daughter of the Jano group. He thought she could help him take down Go-top. He also tried to get close to Shinna because she was engaged to Go Jin. On the way home from the party, Yang Tae corrected his watch and it looked like the one worn by the person who was involved in the hit-and-run with Go Jin. The next day, Go Jin went to visit Kang Min in prison. Sejai showed up to accompany him, but Go Jin asked Sejai to leave them alone. Then, Go Jin asked Kang Min If he was working with Shina, Kang Min denied it and said he didn't know her. Meanwhile, Yang Tae wanted to meet Shina, so he asked Eunjung for help. They went to a mall, and Yang Tae tried to buy Shina a luxury bag as an engagement gift, but she refused it. Unbeknownst to them, Jun Pao was secretly spying on Shina and reported it to Go Jin. Shortly after, Yang Tae's wife Hong Yosa accused him of having an affair with Shina. Although he denied it, Yosa still went berserk and almost hit Shina. Go Jin came to her rescue and pulled her into his arms, causing Yang Tae to get slapped by his wife. Go Jin explained that Shina is his fiancée and forced Yosa to apologize by buying a luxury bag. Later, while in the elevator, Soo-young appeared, so Go Jin hugged Shina to avoid being seen. On the way home, Shina received a call from Yonggu, who informed her that his tractor had been involved in an accident. Panicking, Shina rushed to her father's residence without realizing that Go Jin was in the car with her. As Shina arrived at the field, her heart raced with worry as she saw Yonggu's damaged tractor. Her father, thankfully, was unharmed. Yonggu welcomed them and invited Go Jin to his home, where he discovered that Go Jin had no parents. To Shina's surprise, Yonggu offered to be a father figure to Go Jin. But the shock didn't end there. Go Jin revealed to everyone that he and Shina were engaged. Shina was taken aback and quickly took Go Jin back to Seoul before he could say more. Just as they were about to leave, Oki, dressed as a ghost, appeared out of nowhere and scared Go Jin so much that he fainted. Shina stayed behind until Go Jin recovered, and it was then that she realized it was the anniversary of her mother's death. Her family held a memorial ceremony to honor her mother's memory. After the ceremony, Shina learned that Suho was working a part-time job and feeling stressed due to his boss's unreasonable demands. Shina felt annoyed and went outside to calm down. After Go Jin announced his plans to return to Seoul, his departure was postponed yet again when Yonggu's friends invited him out for drinks. Fortunately, with Shina's help, Go Jin managed to avoid alcohol. However, on the way back, Go Jin was stopped by the police for speeding and suspected of drunk driving. He was taken to the police station until Shina came to bail him out, claiming to be his guardian. When his car ran out of fuel, Go Jin returned to Shina's house on her tractor, which he surprisingly enjoyed. When they arrived at Shina's house, Go Jin had to share a room with her since there were no other available rooms. He witnessed Shina and her family holding a memorial service for her mother's death, and it reminded him of his own experience when his mother passed away. The next morning, Go Jin and Shina were getting ready to leave when they saw Go Jin's car parked in front of Shina's house. Oki called Shina and explained that she had returned Go Jin's car as an apology for her uncle, the police officer who had taken Go Jin to the station the night before. Oki also mentioned that she had left a gift in the car. Meanwhile, Go Jin was grumbling about the boxes of potatoes in his car, and Shina overheard him. She confessed that she had put them in the car as gifts for their trip. But Go Jin didn't appreciate them, and he suggested they dump them on the side of the road. Shina was furious. She pulled over and unloaded all the boxes of potatoes from the car, telling Go Jin to go home alone. She then took the potatoes in a taxi and shared them with anyone she saw, giving them away for free. As Go Jin continued his journey, he couldn't shake off his frustration with Shina for caring more about the potatoes than him. He was hurt when she got angry at him for wanting to throw them away, so he decided to go back and look for her. When Go Jin arrived, all he found was a lone potato. He felt lost and alone. Meanwhile, Shina was continuing her journey to Seoul when she witnessed a terrible accident. A pedestrian had been hit by a car and killed. Seeing this tragedy unfold before her eyes, Shina finally realized how wrong she had been. She had always felt sorry for herself because of her brain tumor, but now she understood that she was actually lucky. She had been given the gift of time to say goodbye to her loved ones before her inevitable death. When Go Jin was at Shina's house, he saw her outside by herself and started to develop feelings for her. But now, back in his apartment, he couldn't stop thinking about the potato Shina had left on the street. He felt guilty about what he had said to her and wasn't sure if he should apologize. At the same time, Shina was at the bus station, still thinking about the accident she had witnessed. But instead of feeling sorry for herself, she realized that she had so much to be grateful for. She was determined to make the most of her remaining time and enjoy her life to the fullest. As for Go Jin, Shina had decided to forgive him for his mistakes and forget about her revenge. As Shina arrived at Go Jin's apartment, she saw him watching a movie and realized that he was just an ordinary person like her. She felt relieved that he had no idea about her past struggles with a brain tumor. Go-jin, however, felt guilty about what Shina had been through and waited anxiously for her to return home. He stayed up all night, worried that she might not be safe. The next morning, Go-jin was surprised to find breakfast waiting for him on the table. Just then, Shina appeared, and he asked why she had only just gotten home. Shina was taken aback by Go-jin's concern and didn't expect him to be waiting for her. In an attempt to reassure him, she suggested they have breakfast together. Go-jin was surprised by Shina's sudden change in attitude towards him. She asked him why he hated onions so much, but he remained silent, lost in thought about his childhood. He remembered how his grandmother used to give him onions, which led to his friends teasing him and calling him Onion Boy. As Go-jin arrived at the office, he was still bewildered by Shina's strange behavior. He called Junpal to meet him, and Junpal quickly arrived in his disguise as a janitor at Gotop. Go-jin was pleased with Junpal's performance and officially hired him as his detective to continue investigating the matter. Before leaving, Junpal noticed some holes in Go-jin's suit, which surprised Go-jin. Suddenly, Se-jai entered the room, so Junpal pretended to be the janitor and left. Se-jai then spoke with Go-jin about Kang-min and lied, saying that it would be difficult to release Kang-min on bail, even though Go-jin had requested it. After Se-jai left, he made a phone call and discovered that he had never applied for Kang-min's release on bail, and had even blocked Go-jin's access to Kang-min's case information. As Go-jin returned to his apartment, he noticed several holes in his suit. Enraged, he searched for the culprit and discovered that nearly all of his suits and jars had been punctured. Even his beloved cactus lay in tatters, ruined by Shina's hand. Meanwhile, Shina sat at her desk in the office, determined to resign from her job. She tidied up her workspace before meeting with Se-jai, whom she handed her resignation letter to. Over at Bakadu, Soo-young's secretary, Jo Jong-ho, suggested that they bring in instructors from other companies to help develop the business. Soo-young took his advice and later visited her father, Chairman Baek, in the hospital. During their conversation, Chairman Baek urged Soo-young to take over the company immediately, but she refused. The topic of Soo-young's marriage came up, and she declared that she would marry for love, not for business. Go-jin arrived home to find his car had been scratched by Shina. As he inspected the damage, an upset Soo-young appeared and entered the apartment without acknowledging him. Go-jin headed outside to check on his car, but before he could, Soo-young hugged him from behind. Though taken aback, Go-jin allowed the embrace, sensing that she was in distress. The following day, Go-jin was surprised to see a new secretary in place of Shina. Meanwhile, Shina visited Suho at the college and Yonggu at his home. Yonggu sensed her troubles and advised her to remain strong and not blame others for her situation. Go-jin headed to the bar where Junpal was, hoping to find out more about Kang-min and Shina's scheming. Junpal assured him that there was no plot, but he did suspect Shina. Her behavior indicated that she wanted to leave, and Go-jin remembered how she had prepared a suitcase in her room, leading him to believe that she had only been kind to him before as a means of plotting her escape. Meanwhile, after visiting her father, Shina returned to Seoul and went to a photo studio to take what she thought would be her final picture. But just as she was about to pose for the photo, she received a call from the hospital informing her that she did not have a brain tumor. She rushed to the hospital to confirm the news, and the doctor apologized for the misdiagnosis. Overjoyed, Shina screamed with happiness in the streets. However, her joy turned to fear when she saw a Gotop poster and remembered all the harm she had caused Go-jin. She couldn't help but imagine his anger, and the thought terrified her. As the night wore on, Shina snuck into Go-jin's apartment to grab her belongings. She hurriedly made her way to the door, but accidentally left her book under the bed. Just as she was about to leave, Go-jin's voice boomed through the room, startling her. She turned to see him approaching and stumbled over her words, trying to explain that she was leaving for a short while. Go-jin allowed her to leave, but not before dropping a bombshell. He didn't have amnesia. Shina was dumbfounded as he recounted the hit-and-run incident that had caused her to faint in front of him. She woke up to a glass of water being thrown in her face, and Go-jin threatening her with legal action for fraud. Shina immediately begged for forgiveness, willing to do anything to make things right. Go-jin took advantage of her desperation and made her sign a hostage contract, essentially making her his fiancée, driver, and maid until she could pay off her debt. One day, a group of Gotop employees and their kids came to Go-jin's office to thank him for giving them time off work, and Pil-sun came too, thanking Go-jin for paying her kids' hospital bill. Go-jin was surprised and confused as he didn't remember doing any of that. It turned out that Shina had taken care of everything. The next day, Yang Ta showed up with a study guide full of math problems that looked eerily similar to Go-tap's concepts. Everyone was in a frenzy and Se-jai suggested that Go-jin stay away from the office. Se-jai went to Go-jin's apartment and explained the situation, telling him that Go-tap needed to release their own study guide soon. Go-jin trusted Se-jai and agreed to go to Kda's anniversary event with Shina. The next day, Shina went to see a lawyer named Junpal about her contract issue with Go-jin, who had disguised it as a friend issue. Junpal suggested that Shina's friend should either surrender or obey all of Go-jin's orders. After the meeting, Go-jin asked Shina to go to a salon to get ready for the Kda event. When they arrived, Shina was quickly dressed up to be stunningly beautiful, and Go-jin was in awe of her beauty. As they entered the Kda venue that evening, Shina found it hard to walk in her high heels, so she asked to go to the restroom. Meanwhile, Go-jin went into the event alone and met a man named Yang Ta. Yang Ta was wearing a watch that looked very similar to the one that Go-jin saw on the man who caused the hit-and-run accident. This made Go-jin suspect that Yang Ta was the mastermind behind the incident. At the same time, a waiter with a scar on his hand poured sleeping pills into Go-jin's drink. But just before he drank it, Yang Tae's subordinate came in and told him about the complaints on the internet about the mistakes in the guidebook released by Ilpum Edu. Go-jin heard the conversation and called Yang Ta a thief. Yang Tae denied it at first, but Go-jin showed him accurate evidence of the mistakes in the guidebook. This left Yang Ta speechless, and Go-jin gave him the drink with a sly smile before leaving. Emotionally charged, Yang Tae drank the spiked drink and passed out. Meanwhile, at the Kda event, Soo-young arrived and met Shina, but when she found out that Shina was Go-jin's secretary, she went into the main room. At Kda event, the officials introduced Soo-young as the CEO of Baek-edu and the youngest daughter of the owner of Jeonnel Group. This announcement surprised Go-jin. Shortly after, Soo-young greeted Go-jin as the CEO of Baek-edu and apologized for not telling him earlier. She wanted to be comfortable around him as friends. At first, Go-jin appeared annoyed with Soo-young's explanation, but eventually he understood why she returned to his life. As Shina arrived, Go-jin immediately embraced her and introduced her as his fiancée to the guests. He then asked her to leave the event as she was uncomfortable being there. Soo-young followed them up the stairs, but Go-jin stopped his steps and asked Shina for permission to do something to her for just 3 seconds. Without turning around, he kissed Shina right in front of Soo-young. Initially surprised, Shina eventually allowed Go-jin to kiss her. Soo-young looked shocked as she witnessed the kiss. After the kiss, Go-jin tried to justify it as a mere show, promising to write off all of Shina's debts and apologize to her for any humiliation she might have felt. However, Shina was furious and demanded a sincere apology from him. Finally, Go-jin apologized sincerely and admitted that the kiss was his mistake. Meanwhile, Soo-young couldn't stop thinking about her encounter with Go-jin and Shina at the Kda event. Memories of her past relationship with Go-jin flooded back. She recalled how Chairman Baek had disapproved of their relationship and went to great lengths to separate them. He even falsely accused Go-jin of academic fraud, forcing him to be investigated by the police. Soo-young was afraid that Chairman Baek might hurt Go-jin, so she had to break up with him and pretend to be getting married to protect her reputation. Shina couldn't sleep when she got home, as she kept replaying the kiss with Go-jin in her head. She couldn't understand why she was still upset with him, even after his sincere apology. Meanwhile, Go-jin was also thinking about the kiss, replaying the scene in his mind and even imagining kissing her while watching a movie. The next day, Shina was seen packing the dress and accessories she wore to the Kda event into a box to return to Go-jin. Oki noticed and took the earring box without Shina noticing. When Shina returned the items to Go-jin at the office, he didn't really want to accept them and told her to take them to his apartment. After Shina left, Se-jai went to Go-jin's room. As Se-jai was looking at the writing on the blackboard, Go-jin suddenly said that he saw Se-jai. Se-jai was surprised and wondered what Go-jin meant. The scene then switched to the night of the hit and run, where Go-jin saw Se-jai wearing a watch coming towards him. Back in the present, Se-jai asked Go-jin what he meant by seeing him. Go-jin lied and said that he saw Se-jai on his way to work. He did this because he couldn't believe that his best friend could have evil intentions, and he also wanted to find out what Se-jai's true motives were. While they were having tea, CJ tried to ask Go-jin various questions to see if he really had amnesia or not. Eventually, CJ excused himself from Go-jin's room. After CJ left, Go-jin remembered the times when CJ was his only friend. CJ had helped Go-jin when he was down by giving all his savings to develop Go-top. The two of them went through many struggles together, and finally, Go-top became successful. Now, Go-jin couldn't understand why CJ would betray him. He wondered if everything CJ did was just a lie. Lost in his grief, Shinna walked into Go-jin's room and saw him so sad that she asked how he was doing. He was silent at first, then he grasped her hand and asked her to stay with him for a minute. They stood there in silence, and Shinna could feel the pain in his heart. Meanwhile, Eunjung was about to leave the Go-top office because she was worried about being caught leaking her company's study guide to Yangta. But Sejai blocked her and invited her to his room. He had found out that Eunjung betrayed Go-top, and she admitted it. Sejai then met with Yangtae to offer cooperation. Go-jin woke up with a headache and saw various medicines on his desk with notes from Shinna, who had prepared them for him. He smiled as he remembered her kindness in returning his handshake and keeping him company. Soon after, he received a message from Junpal with a photo of Sejai with Yangtae. At a restaurant, Sejai and Yangtae were discussing their cooperation. Sejai even shared Go-jin's plan for the next 6 months to take over the Ilpum Edu Academy team. As Shinna returned from work, she carried a box of clothes and accessories that she wanted to return to Go-jin's apartment. Despite struggling with the weight of the box, Shinna did not know that Go-jin tried to help her by supporting it with his index finger. Upon reaching the apartment, Go-jin kept asking Shinna to stay with him and do various things until it was almost midnight when she asked to go home. Worried about Shinna going home alone, Go-jin offered to drive her to the curb, pretending that he wanted to buy a drink. The next day, Go-jin forced Shinna to make time to join him and Soo-young for dinner at a restaurant. Throughout the night, Go-jin tried to impress Soo-young by showing her the romance in his relationship with Shinna. When Soo-young asked what made him fall in love with Shinna, he said that Shinna never left him alone, especially after he scolded a waiter for accidentally spilling hot coffee on her. Later on, Shinna left to clean her clothes in the restroom, and Soo-young asked Go-jin to remember her. After dinner, Go-jin was lost in thought, reminiscing about his memories with Soo-young when Shinna kept asking him where to put the box of dresses and accessories. Despite him telling her that he will keep the box, they end up fighting, causing all the items to fall out. As Shinna cleaned up the mess, she realized that the earring box was missing, and Go-jin accused her of stealing it. Shinna denied it and hit Go-jin with a pillow. They continued fighting with pillows until Shinna got angry and decided to compensate Go-jin for all his losses, even allowing him to report her to the police. The next day, Shinna planned to resign, but she received a call from Go-top's employee who asked her to bring the simulation exam supervision file to the studio. When she arrived, the studio was busy preparing for a commercial, and a man with a scar on his hand was changing a bolt on a lighting fixture with a fragile material. As filming was about to begin, Go-jin was practicing his lines for the commercial. Shinna arrived with some important files, and when she saw Go-jin on stage, she heard a strange noise coming from the lighting equipment behind him. She realized that it was about to fall on him, so she acted quickly and pushed him out of the way to save him. Everyone was shocked to see what happened, and Go-jin was still trying to process it all. Shinna was worried about him and asked if he was okay, but she soon noticed that her leg was injured from the fall. Go-jin was grateful to Shinna for saving him, and he immediately took her to the hospital. He was very worried about her and stayed by her side throughout her treatment. Shinna was surprised by how caring Go-jin was, but her happiness was short-lived. In the elevator, Go-jin suddenly asked her to go to his messy apartment and clean up after their previous fight. He reminded her that she still owed him money, and that their hostage contract would continue until her debt was paid off. Shinna was upset by this and felt like Go-jin only cared about the money. Despite this, Go-jin also apologized for accusing Shinna of stealing from him the previous night. The next day, Go-jin arrived at the office and was greeted by Soo-young, who came to recruit instructors for the company. She asked him to have dinner with her and threatened to tell Shin that he was her first love if he refused. Meanwhile, Eunjung met Yangtae after deciding to stop spying on Go-top. Later, at Shinna's house, she was surprised to see Oki wearing the earrings that she was supposed to return to Go-jin. She finally realized that Oki was the one who took them, and felt bad for Go-jin, who had apologized to her earlier. While she was thinking about it, Go-jin sent her a message telling her to go straight to the office and not to stop by his apartment. When she arrived, she was surprised to find that he wasn't there and had turned off his phone. But when she looked at the calendar, she realized that it was the anniversary of Go-jin's grandmother's death. Sometime later, Shinna prepared food for Go-jin's grandmother's death anniversary at his apartment. He was touched by her gesture and they talked about his grandmother. Go-jin told Shin that his grandmother used to work as an onion peeler, and he hated onions because they reminded him of her sadness every time she peeled them. However, nowadays, onions remind Go-jin of other people. A few days later, the audit team suddenly confiscated the research team's belongings to investigate the study guide issue, which caused an uproar among the Go-top research team. The team protested against Go-jin by going on strike. He also met Se-jai, who had sent the audit team to check the research team. Go-jin was disappointed in Se-jai, who had changed from the kind person he used to be. A problem arose when the research team went on strike, causing Go-jin to seek the help of Shinna to organize a special lecture. This was a tough task, but they managed to pull it off successfully. Meanwhile, Se-jai met Yang Ta at a restaurant and told him about Go-jin's amnesia. However, Yang Ta didn't believe him because he remembered Go-jin correctly answering questions about the study guide at the pet event. Se-jai was caught off guard and wanted to confirm this himself. The scene shifts to Go-jin, who agrees to have dinner with Soo-young. However, he becomes annoyed when she constantly talks about their past, and he declares that it will be their last dinner together. Go-jin tells Soo-young that she can tell Shinna about her first love if she wants. Later, Go-jin returns to his apartment and is surprised to find Se-jai there with peaches. Se-jai wants to test if Go-jin has amnesia or not. Go-jin is allergic to peaches, but to cover up her lie, she eats one and ends up getting sick. Se-jai calls Shinna to come and help take care of Go-jin. At this point, Se-jai thinks that Go-jin really has amnesia. The next morning, Go-jin woke up and found Shinna sleeping beside him. He wanted to touch her head, but he stopped himself because he remembered how the people he cared about always left him, causing him to close his heart. Meanwhile, Se-jai wanted to get close to Soo-young, so he staged a car accident to meet her. He told her that he was close to Go-jin and had doubts about whether Shinna was really his fiancée. That night, Go-jin had dinner with Shinna and gave her a document to tear up, ending their agreement. He told her that she was fired, which left Shinna feeling hurt and abandoned by Go-jin. In the days that followed, Go-jin couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing Shinna. No matter how hard he tried to forget about her, she kept popping up in his thoughts. It wasn't long before he started seeing her everywhere he went, even though she wasn't really there. As time went on, Go-jin began to feel more and more desperate. One night, Go-jin couldn't take it anymore. He broke into Shinna's apartment and found some of her things left behind. Among them were her medicine and a diary. Curiosity got the best of him and he started reading the diary. To his shock, Go-jin discovered that Shinna had a terminal brain tumor. She had been planning to take revenge on Go-jin for something she thought he had done to her. But she eventually realized that her illness was not anyone's fault. After reading her words, Go-jin knew he had to find Shinna. He raced to her residence, but she was nowhere to be found. That's when he remembered that his friend Junpal had installed a tracking device on Shinna. He called Junpal and begged him to help track her down. Meanwhile, Shinna went to the Go-top office to pick up her belongings. While she was there, she couldn't resist the urge to go into Go-jin's room. To her surprise, Go-jin suddenly appeared, blocking her exit. Shinna asked him why he was blocking her, but Go-jin didn't answer. Instead, he poured out his heart to her and asked her out on a date. Shinna remained silent, unsure of how to respond. The day after Go-jin asked Shinna out, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Suddenly, she was surprised by his arrival at her house. Go-jin apologized for firing her and asked her to come back to work, but Shinna refused and said she wouldn't return. Go-jin didn't give up though. He told her about the research team on strike and how he would apologize to them if she returned to work. Finally, Shinna agreed to go back to work at Go-top. Later that day, Shinna went out to buy some snacks. She was lost in thought about Go-jin's declaration of love when she bumped into a girl named Nasu-yeon. A motorcycle almost hit Shinna, but luckily Go-jin appeared and pulled her to safety. As they walked away, Soo-yeon gave them a meaningful look. Later that night, Go-jin took Shinna home. But when they got there, they found Suho at her house with Aki. Suho wanted to stay at Shinna's house since he quit college, but Shinna was upset. Suho decided to leave, but Go-jin ambushed him because he thought Suho was a bad person. Suho explained that he was Shina's younger brother, and Go-jin let him go. Suho recognized Go-jin as his future brother-in-law and invited him into the house, but Shina was still angry and wanted to splash Suho with water. She missed and soaked Go-jin's face instead. Shina felt guilty and helped him wipe his face. Soon after, Yong-gu showed up and Suho thought Shina and Go-jin were living together. The family court was held, and Suho hid behind Shina and Go-jin. Shina and Go-jin nervously tried to explain to Yong-gu that they weren't living together. But Yong-gu surprised them by asking them to live together and have a child quickly. That night, Go-jin stayed at Shina's house, as per Yong-gu's request. Yong-gu was very happy with Go-jin's presence. The next morning, Yong-gu took Go-jin out for breakfast and confessed that he liked him since the first day he came to the house. Go-jin was surprised and touched by this. He promised to protect Shina. At Baek-edu, Soo-young learns about Shina from Jong-ho, and they meet Si-ji's invitation to drink at a bar. Si-ji advises Soo-young to offer Shina a job at Baek-edu so that she can keep her away from Go-jin. That night, Go-jin researches Shina's condition because he doesn't want to lose her like he lost his grandmother. The next day, Go-dap announced an audition for a new instructor, but Go-jin excludes Shina, claiming she's not talented enough. Shina is upset, but then Soo-young calls her for a meeting and offers her a job as an instructor at Baek-edu, as Si-ji had suggested. Go-jin went to the funeral of Sing Academy's CEO, and there he met Yang-ta. He was surprised when Yang-tae told him that Ilpum Edu had bought the academy. But then Go-jin realized that Yang-tae didn't know that Go-jin had lost his memory, and despite that, Go-jin had memorized everything about his life, including Yang-tae's past. Yang-tae used to make Go-jin teach math and pretended that Go-jin was a top-notch instructor from Oxford to earn more money. However, when Go-jin was accused of falsifying his academic records, Yang-tae easily betrayed him, even though it was Yang-tae who had falsified Go-jin's records in the first place. After the funeral, Go-jin accidentally met Si-ji at Go-top. Si-ji pretended to be surprised when Go-jin told him about the acquisition of Sing Academy by Ilpum Edu. The next day, Go-jin was disappointed to learn from Aki that Shina had left early in the morning. He had asked her to come to his room, but she found a message asking her to clean the blackboard. While cleaning it, she almost fell down the stairs, but Go-jin caught her just in time. The atmosphere between Go-jin and Shina became awkward when Aki informed Go-jin that Shina would become the director of Baek-edu. Go-jin then explained to Shin that the reason he didn't let her audition for the Go-top instructor position was that he wanted her to stay by his side. He also revealed his feelings for her again and asked if she accepted or rejected them. But before she could answer, Go-jin said he would kiss her for 3 seconds. Shina was surprised but didn't resist when he kissed her. In that moment, Shina kissed him back, revealing her true feelings for him. When Go-jin asked if they were now dating, Shina playfully replied that they would start tomorrow. That night, Go-jin and Shina were on their way back home when they bumped into Aki and Suho, who were just back from buying food. Suho invited Go-jin to join them for dinner, and he agreed. Later that night, while in Shina's room, Go-jin saw a note where she wrote that she wanted to become an instructor. Go-jin advised her to give up her dream, but Shina was even more determined to pursue it. The next day, when Go-jin came to pick up Shina, he held her hand in front of the Go-top employees, making her feel embarrassed. He wanted to show the world that they were now in a relationship. Meanwhile, Seo-jae received a call from a nursing home and said that he would be going there soon. Once upon a time, Go-jin had a secret plan to help Shina, who dreamed of becoming an instructor. One day, he approached some Go-top staff for advice on how to assist her. That evening, Go-jin confided in Junpal that he would retire to concentrate on Shina's recovery. On a separate occasion, Shina bumped into Soo-young, who invited her to become an instructor at Baek-edu. Shina politely declined the offer, but Soo-young urged her to reconsider by presenting reasonable arguments. After their conversation, Go-jin spotted them talking and became upset with Soo-young for interfering in his relationship with Shina. He made it clear that he had feelings for Shina and asked Soo-young to stop meddling. As Shina returned home, she noticed something strange. All of her furniture had been replaced. Then Go-jin showed up, thrilled to see the place looking much nicer. He even wanted to move in, but Aki put her foot down and said there wasn't enough room. Go-jin then spilled the beans that Aki and Suho were dating, and suggested that they could share a room, leaving Go-jin and Shina to bunk together. But when Shina found out about her best friend's secret relationship, she lost it and hit Suho. Later on, while in her room, Shina asked Go-jin why he had replaced all her furniture. He replied that he was worried about her health, especially with a tumor. Shina was taken aback by this, as it wasn't true, but Go-jin didn't believe her and even showed her the diary where he had read it. A few days later, Shina tried to convince Go-jin that she wasn't sick, but he insisted they visit the doctor anyway. When they got there, the doctor said he had made a mistake and Shina was actually healthy. Go-jin was furious, feeling like he had gone to great lengths for no reason, and walked away from Shina. She was confused and thought that he only asked her out because he felt sorry for her. As Shina sat there lost in thought, Go-jin suddenly returned and hugged her. He was crying and revealed that he had been tormented by the thought of her being sick and possibly dying. He was afraid of losing her, just like he had lost his parents and grandmother. Finally, Shina understood and tried to calm Go-jin down by giving him a kiss and assuring him that everything would be okay. The next day, Go-jin was over the moon because he had a date with Shina. They were both beaming with happiness and had a wonderful time on their first date. However, their joy was short-lived when they bumped into Aki and Suho, who were in tears after reading Shina's diary. They were convinced that she had a tumor, but Shina tried to assure them that it was not true. Later, at the Go-top office, Gong Hee-cheol, one of the instructors, bid farewell to Go-jin as he was leaving to teach at Baek-edu. Soo-yeon accompanied him, but things took a turn for the worse when Se-jai spread a false rumor to Chae-bad that Go-jin had asked for him to be expelled from the company. Chae-bad was heartbroken, and Se-jai tried to turn the tables on Go-jin by asking someone with power at the company to convince shareholders to remove him from his CEO position. Se-jai also added fuel to the fire by claiming that Go-jin would soon face charges of tax evasion, which could lead to serious consequences for the company. The fact that Go-jin was currently suffering from amnesia only made things worse, as there were fears that he would not be able to handle his responsibilities properly. Meanwhile, Yang Tao went to Baek-edu and learned that Hee-cheol had joined the company. He then decided to help Soo-yeon attack Go-top by revealing that Go-jin had amnesia but had somehow managed to remember everything. Later, he bumped into Se-jai, who uncovered his identity as a shareholder in Go-top. Se-jai then asked Yang Tae to help him remove Go-jin from his position as CEO. At the same time, Soo-yeon became suspicious about Go-jin's amnesia and invited him to a bar to test his memory. She pretended to be drunk and asked if he remembered the day they broke up. When he didn't respond, she realized that he wasn't really suffering from amnesia. Go-jin finally admitted that he had lied about having amnesia and that he had fallen in love with Shina. His anger towards Soo-yeon began to dissipate. After leaving the bar, Go-jin went straight to Shina's house to tell her how much he missed her. She took a photo of herself using his phone and told him to look at it whenever he missed her. On another day, Se-jai approached Eun-jung with an important document, the Go-top loss report. He asked her to take care of it, and she agreed to do so. However, that night, Shina received a sudden invitation from Soo-yeon. Soo-yeon confessed that her first love was Go-jin and pleaded with Shina to break off her fake engagement with him, believing that he still had feelings for her. The conversation left Shina deeply conflicted, and she spent the night pondering her relationship with Go-jin. She even took off their fake engagement ring. The following day, Go-jin arrived to pick up Shina, but she had already left. He was taken aback when he learned from Suho that Shina had met with a woman he suspected was Soo-yeon the previous night. Meanwhile, Shina met up with Soo-yeon, who urged her to reconsider her decision and follow her heart. After much thought, Shina realized that she truly loved Go-jin and decided to stay by his side. At Baek-edu, Soo-yeon returned to her room and found Go-jin waiting for her. She warned him not to drag Shina into their issues, but as he left, he bumped into Jong-ho, who gave him a menacing glare. Later at Go-top, Go-jin invited Shina to skip work and take a stroll along the Han River. As they walked, Shina took off her fake engagement ring, and Go-jin asked why she hadn't asked about his relationship with Soo-yeon. She told him she wanted to give him time to move on from his past love. Meanwhile, Michelle received a troubling message, warning her that she might be reported for falsifying her academic records. A few days later, Shina was busy training to become an instructor, and Go-jin felt like she was ignoring him. One day, she overheard Oki talking to Suho about something at Go-jin's house that made her upset, so she rushed over there. But just as she was about to drag Suho out, he got hungry, so the four of them ended up eating together. During dinner, Go-jin seemed jealous when he found out that Shina was going to meet Oh Hee-seok, who he thought was her first love because she cried when he joined the military. So, without telling Shina, Go-jin showed up at the dinner and introduced himself as her boyfriend. Shina's friends were amazed. When Go-jin asked about Hee-seok, he was surprised to learn that she was actually a woman who happened to join the military. This relieved him, and he left Shina to have fun with her friends. As the group finished their meal, Shina and her buddies walked out of the restaurant. They were about to cross the street when out of nowhere, a car nearly hit Shina. The driver turned out to be Soo-young's older sister, but instead of apologizing, she insulted Shina. The situation quickly escalated into a heated argument between Soo-young's sister Naoki, who stood up for Shina. The altercation got physical, and Shina was even shoved to the ground. Luckily, Go-jin witnessed the whole thing and intervened to help Shina and her friends. With a stern glare at Soo-young's sister, Go-jin led the group away from the scene of the scuffle. After some time, Go-jin and the gang continued their night out. But then, out of the blue, Soo-young came up to Go-jin to try and explain why she left him in the past. However, Go-jin wasn't having it and refused to listen to her. Soo-young was deeply hurt by his dismissal and resolved not to forgive him. The following day, Eun-jung caved under CJ's persuasion and agreed to help him out by exposing Go-jin. Following CJ's orders and evidence, Eun-jung held a press conference to accuse Go-jin of tax evasion and bullying Go-top employees. Meanwhile, Go-jin calmly watched the news in his room, looking as though he had anticipated the backlash. Se-ja, on the other hand, was feeling quite confident. He believed that he had successfully convinced the shareholders to remove Go-jin from his position as CEO. This was especially true given the large demonstrations taking place, where people were boycotting Go-jin and demanding that he be investigated for the alleged wrongdoings. Over at Baekdu, Soo-young was also plotting against Go-jin. She planned to take over Go-top and join in on the attack against him. One night, Shina grew concerned when Go-jin failed to answer her calls. Worried for his safety, she decided to head over to his apartment. Just as she was about to leave, Go-jin suddenly appeared with some snacks, looking carefree as ever. That night, they found strength in each other's company. When Go-jin returned to the office, he was shocked to find Se-ja sitting in his chair. Se-ja made it clear that he wanted to be the new CEO of Go-top, and subtly pressured Go-jin to step down. Se-ja argued that this was necessary to protect the company from collapsing and to prevent employees from losing their jobs due to Go-jin's mistakes. One day while Go-jin was out, tax officials arrived and confiscated his belongings. Despite her efforts, Shina couldn't stop them. Later, while still in Go-jin's room, Shina accidentally found a button that led to a secret room. Inside, she found items that contained death threats to Go-jin and a board detailing his suspicions about the people around him. She was shocked. Just then, Go-jin returned and explained that he suspected Se-ja of being behind a recent hit-and-run incident. Se-ja was somewhere with his younger sister, Oh Se-hee, and vowed to take down Go-jin. Once news of Go-jin's tax evasion spread, an extraordinary meeting was held by Go-top to vote on whether or not to demote him from his position as CEO. Before the meeting began, Go-jin sent a message to Yang-ta, surprising him. As the meeting started, all shareholders present, including Yang-ta, voted. However, the results showed that not enough votes were in favor of Go-jin's demotion. Se-ja, who hoped to remove Go-jin, was disappointed. He then tried to attack Go-jin by revealing that he had amnesia and could not manage the company. But Go-jin revealed that he was pretending to have amnesia and provided evidence that Se-ja embezzled billions of won from Go-top funds under the guise of overseas investment. Se-ja was shocked. At the meeting, Se-ja was reported to the authorities for breach of trust. Soo-young then picked up Se-ji as they both aimed to destroy Go-jin. Go-jin manages to clear his name from the accusations against him with various evidence. Eun-jung apologizes to Go-jin, but he refuses to forgive her and warns her not to work in education again. He also plans to sue her for defamation. Shina is present and tries to persuade Go-jin to drop the lawsuit, but he refuses. Go-jin allows Shina to participate in an instructor audition, but she decides to become an independent instructor instead. Meanwhile, Soo-young comes to Go-top to inform Go-jin that Se-ja has been recruited by Baekdu and threatens to destroy Go-top. Go-jin goes to Se-ji's villa to understand his motives for betraying him and discovers CCTV footage of the hit-and-run incident. As he checked the tape, he was astonished to see that after Se-ja left, another guy showed up. Go-jin didn't waste any time and went straight to Kang-min in jail to show him the snapshot from the CCTV footage. As he suspected, Kang-min recognized Jong-ho, who was Soo-young's secretary. Jong-ho is known in the gambling world and provoked Kang-min, who bumped into Go-jin afterwards. Kang-min then revealed that Se-jae had visited him once and asked if Kang-min sent an anonymous letter to him. Armed with this knowledge, Go-jin quickly sought out Se-jae and confronted him about the anonymous letter. He showed Se-jae the photographic evidence that he was at the scene of Go-jin's hit and run. Se-jae, looking disgusted, accused Go-jin of being Se-hee's murderer. Go-jin was taken aback and remembered when he was a teacher at the school, and he caught Se-hee stealing materials from his office. Without knowing the facts, Se-jae accused Go-jin of driving Se-hee to suicide based on a recording that showed Go-jin refusing to forgive her even after she apologized. The next day, Shin-ah was opening packages for Go-jin at Go-top, when one of the packages suddenly exploded, causing panic among the employees. Go-top reported the incident to the police, and during the investigation, they discovered that 3 months ago, all employees had received a death threat email, but no one reported it because they thought it was a joke. Soon after, Go-jin was informed that the person who sent the dangerous package had been caught, and it turned out to be Hae-sun's son, his former secretary. Go-jin was shocked and immediately went to the police station to find out more about the situation. After returning home, Go-jin went to visit Jun-pal at the bar and told him about the email containing death threats that all Go-top employees had received a few months ago. He was surprised and disappointed that no one had reported it, concluding that all employees were in favor of the perpetrator and wanted him dead. Go-jin, a man, returned to his office where he was met by 2 women, Yeon-hee and So-ra, who confessed to a crime. Go-jin was deeply upset and declared that he would not forgive them and would sue them for their actions. Another woman, Shin-ah, tried to convince Go-jin to forgive all of his former secretaries, but he was too angry and accused Shin-ah of siding with those who had hurt him. Later that night, Shin-ah was seen crying at home after Go-jin scolded her. Meanwhile, a woman named Soo-deon was marking Go-jin's photo with an ominous H1 before he was to die. Soon after, Soo-deon showed up at Shin-ah's door and asked to talk in her car. Without suspecting anything, Shin-ah agreed to the chat, but Soo-deon drugged her and knocked her unconscious. Later, Soo-deon sent Go-jin a text about Shin-ah's condition and called him to say that Shin-ah was with her. This made Go-jin very worried, so he rushed to Shin-ah's house. When he got there, he found Aki instead of Shin-ah. Then, he received another message from Soo-deon with an address to go to. Without hesitation, Go-jin rushed to the address and asked Oki to call the police. When he arrived, he saw Soo-deon, who used to work as an English instructor at Go-top, but was fired by Go-jin for having a relationship with a student. Soo-deon confessed that she had been terrorizing Go-jin as revenge for him, not believing in her innocence and ruining her life. She planned to commit suicide by jumping off the roof in front of him so that he would feel guilty forever. Meanwhile, the police and firefighters arrive at the scene after Oki contacts them. On the rooftop, Go-jin tries to calm Soo-deon down, but she keeps falling. He tries to grab her hand, but they both end up falling off the roof because Go-jin's footing wasn't secure. The next day, Go-jin wakes up in the hospital with Shin-ah by his side. They both survived the fall thanks to a mattress the police had put down. Shin-ah had been freed by the police from Soo-deon's room. Later, Go-jin visits Soo-deon in her hospital room and is relieved to see that she's safe. As the sun was high in the sky, Shin-ah was on her way to visit Go-jin at the hospital. But when she arrived, she was shocked to find that he wasn't there. Little did she know that Go-jin had retreated to his apartment without a word to anyone. In that silent space, he couldn't help but think about the recent events that had left him feeling shattered. Memories of his most painful past flooded his mind, reminding him of the time when Soo-young broke up with him and plunged him into a deep depression. He had come close to ending his life, and ever since then, he had lost his ability to feel empathy for others. Go-jin found it hard to understand people's emotions and forgive them for their mistakes. In the present, Shin-ah sensed that something was wrong and went to see Go-jin. She approached him with understanding and tried to soothe his troubled mind. Shin-ah knew how he felt, having experienced similar feelings in her own life. Go-jin realized his mistakes and asked for her help in becoming a better person. With Shin-ah's help, Go-jin finally made amends with everyone he had wronged, including his former secretary. He even invited them back to work at Go-top. He also apologized to Soo-deon for not trusting her in the past. Meanwhile, Se-jae was seen talking to Jong-ho, asking for his help to destroy Go-jin. Jong-ho felt his plan had succeeded because he had sent an anonymous letter to Se-jae with a recording of Go-jin and Si-hee's conversation. He had edited the recording to make it seem like Go-jin was to blame for Si-hee's death and provoked Si-ji to seek revenge. Jong-ho also sent a message to Se-jae about Go-jin dying at a villa in Gangnam, so that Se-jae would be there during the hit and run. In the present day, Go-jin is taken aback by the news that Jdrama Group is stopping Go-top from getting funding by making them pay back their loan sooner than expected. He turns to Yang Ta for help, who reveals that he was once in Go-jin's position when Jdrama Group asked him to fake Go-jin's academic records. If he refused, they threatened to ruin his life. Yang Tae then tells Go-jin that Chairman Baek, the leader of Jdrama Group, disapproves of Go-jin's relationship with Soo-young and is trying to end it by destroying Go-jin's life, even to the point of killing him. Go-jin finally realizes that Soo-young left him to protect him from her father, who didn't approve of their relationship. He rushes to see her, regretting that she didn't tell him the truth before. Go-jin apologizes for not realizing Soo-young's sacrifice sooner and refuses to listen to her explanation. As Se-jae sat in Jong-ho's car on their way to a meeting, he stumbled upon Si-hee's lost cell phone. Meanwhile, Go-jin sat alone in his apartment, lost in thought about Se-jae. Se-jae had accused Go-jin of causing Si-hee's untimely death, leaving him with a heavy burden of guilt. Go-jin scoured the internet for information about Jong-ho and his whereabouts. It wasn't until later that he realized that Jong-ho had come to him while he was incapacitated after a hit-and-run accident. Go-jin also reflected on his past, recalling a time when he was a math instructor at an institution alongside Jong-ho. Jong-ho was always the lowest-ranked instructor, but he had a plan to get ahead by using Go-jin's study guide. He convinced Si-hee, his girlfriend, to steal the guide for him. However, Go-jin caught Si-hee in the act and recorded their conversation. He demanded to know why she was stealing his study guide, and she admitted that Jong-ho had put her up to it. She begged for Go-jin's forgiveness, but he refused to forgive Jong-ho until he took responsibility for his actions. Later on, Si-hee begged Jong-ho to apologize to Go-jin for stealing his study guide, but Jong-ho refused. Instead, he blamed Si-hee and broke up with her, saying he was tired of her family's problems. Si-hee, already burdened with caring for her father, who had Alzheimer's, and a brother who shirked his responsibilities, felt overwhelmed and committed suicide after Jong-ho left. In the present day, Si-jae confronts Go-jin about the discrepancies between the recording of Si-hee's conversation with Go-jin and the canned letter Si-jae received months ago. The next day, Yang Tae talks to Soo-young, asking her to stop her efforts to ruin Go-jin's life. It explains that hurting someone twice is wrong. Hearing this, Soo-young is shocked to learn that Go-jin had attempted suicide after their breakup. She realizes that her past actions could not protect him. Jong-ho was fuming with anger when he realized that Se-jae had taken Si-hee's phone from his car. Meanwhile, Go-jin, who was driving Shinna back home, received a message and suddenly had to leave, leaving Shinna worried. When Go-jin reached his apartment's parking lot, Jong-ho was waiting for him. Jong-ho revealed that he had instigated Si-jae by sending him an anonymous letter because he wanted to take revenge on Go-jin, who had destroyed his life. Jong-ho did not feel remorseful about Si-hee, thinking that she would be better off dead. Enraged, he tried to attack Go-jin with a knife, but Se-jae appeared and paralyzed him. The police arrived and arrested Jong-ho. Earlier, Go-jin and Se-jae had come up with a plan to make Jong-ho confess and reveal his motives. After Jong-ho's arrest, Go-jin and Se-jae apologized to each other for their past mistakes. The following morning, Shinna arrived at Go-jin's apartment, worried about him after what happened the previous night. Go-jin told her everything, and though Shinna was upset that he hadn't told her earlier, she was happy that Go-jin and Se-jae were friends again. Suddenly, Soo-young showed up at Go-jin's apartment, so Shinna and Se-jae left to give them some privacy. Go-jin and Soo-young forgave each other since they both knew the truth. Soo-young realized that Go-jin couldn't be with her because he loved Shinna. One day, a boy named Kim Do-yoon rushed into the Go-top office, desperate to see his mother, Eun-jung. Meanwhile, Eun-jung was trying to find a job, but her past at Go-top kept coming back to haunt her. Shinna called Eun-jung, and they met up at Go-top. When Go-jin saw the emotional reunion between mother and son and heard about Eun-jung's struggles, he asked her to come back to work at Go-top. Later that evening, Shinna was overjoyed to learn that she got a job as an instructor at Ilpomedu. The next day, Chunpal met with Go-jin to give her a final report before their contract ended. Chunpal told her that on the night of her hit and run, not only did Shinna and Sejai call for help, but Kangmin also called the emergency number to get her help. As fate would have it, Shinna and Yang-tae crossed paths when he hired her from a website where she teaches Korean. Shinna was careful to conceal her true identity as Go-jin's fiancé, wearing a mask to keep her secret safe. But Yang-tae later spilled the beans to Go-jin, sparking a fire of anger within him. Go-jin felt betrayed by Shinna and thought that she had gone behind his back to work for their rival Go-top. Shinna was quick to apologize and explain that she wanted to make it on her own without any special favors from Go-jin. She didn't want any rumors to spread that she only got the job because of him. To her relief, Go-jin understood her reasoning and wasn't actually angry with her for taking the job. He was only upset with Yang-tae's insinuations that Go-jin had somehow helped Shinna land the position at Ilpam Edu. Some time later, Shinna reunited with Soo-young to mend their broken relationship. It seemed like a weight had been lifted off Soo-young's shoulders as she was able to let go of all the hurt and pain in her heart. With this newfound closure, both women could move forward with their lives, knowing that they had each other's support. As Sejai visits See's ashes, he realizes the mistake he made by leaving to study abroad and leaving his father and See alone while she struggled with Alzheimer's. As he contemplates his actions, he unexpectedly runs into Go-jin, who is also paying his respects to See. Go-jin asks CG to come back to work at Go-top, recognizing the company needs his skills. Leaving the ashes behind, Sejai goes to visit his father and makes a promise to take care of him instead of See. Meanwhile, Shinna decides to resign from Go-top after landing a job at Ilpam Edu. Before she leaves, Go-jin encourages her and promises to continue supporting her. He has transformed into a friendly boss who is loved by all his employees. A few days later, Go-jin drove Shinna to her first day of teaching at Ilpam Edu. After finishing her classes, Go-jin surprised her with flowers and took her for a walk in a beautiful park. While they were there, he unexpectedly proposed to her, and Shinna happily said yes. In the end, the series concludes with Shinna and Go-jin enjoying their time together. As they reminisce about their love journey, Go-jin remembers how they got married and now live happily together. Moral lesson that we can learn from the story is, be accountable for your actions and don't shift blame onto others without justification. Always double-check before playing pranks or blaming others to avoid regret.